The last rays of sunlight glinted off the tear that slid down Lillian Keller's cheek as she pressed her face against Starlight's neck, inhaling the familiar scent of her beloved Palomino mare for what she believed would be the final time. The year was 1875, and in the harsh landscape of the Colorado Territory, sentiment was a luxury that debt couldn't afford. "I ain't got all day, Miss Keller," grumbled Silas Hemming, the owner of Central City's largest livery stable and horse trading post. His impatience was evident as he jingled the coins in his pocket, the sound a cruel reminder of Lillian's desperate circumstances. Lillian stood tall at 22 years of age, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid, her calloused hands betraying years of hard work despite her youth. 6 months ago, her father had passed, leaving her with a small ranch outside Central City, Colorado, a mountain of debt, and precious little else. She'd fought to keep their home, taking in laundry, selling eggs from their chickens, and even working at the general store when Mr. Peterson would have her. But winter was approaching, and the bank wanted payment. "$20 is my final offer," Hemming said, his jowly face set in a hard line. "And that's being generous, considering the market." Lillian bit her lip to keep from arguing. Starlight was worth 3 times that amount. The mare had been her 16th birthday present, a companion through the hardest years of her life. They had grown up together, traversed the mountainous terrain surrounding Central City as one unit, understanding each other's movements before they happened. "Fine," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. $20. Hemming counted out the coins and pressed them into her palm. The metal felt cold against her skin, like pieces of her heart turning to ice. She gave Starlight one last pat, removed her saddle and bridle, and walked away without looking back, knowing if she did, her resolve would crumble. The $20 would buy her another month, maybe 2, before she'd have to face the bank again. Perhaps by then, she would have figured out a way to keep the small ranch her father had built with his own hands. Unbeknownst to Lillian, a tall figure leaned against the doorframe of the mercantile across the street, watching the transaction with interest. Yates Dawson had been in Central City for just 3 weeks, having ridden in from Wyoming Territory seeking work. At 28, he'd seen his share of hard times and recognized the pain etched on the young woman's face as she surrendered her horse. After Lillian disappeared around the corner, Yates straightened his worn Stetson and sauntered across the dusty street toward the livery. A plan was forming in his mind, one that might ease the suffering he'd witnessed in those clear blue eyes. "Hemming," he called, stepping into the dim interior of the stable. "That Palomino you just bought, I want to take a look at her." Hemming's face lit up at the prospect of a quick profit. "Fine, you've got Dawson, just got her in. Prime stock." Yates approached Starlight's stall, studying the mare's conformation. She was indeed a beautiful animal with intelligent eyes that watched him warily. "How much?" he asked, running a hand along her golden neck. "For you, $40, Hemming said with a smirk. Yates snorted. "You paid the lady 20 not 10 minutes ago. Business is business. That's my price." After 15 minutes of haggling, they settled on $35, nearly all of Yates's savings from his recent work at the Silver Plume mine. But as he led the Palomino away, saddle and bridle in tow, he felt certain it was money well spent. The problem was, he didn't know where Lillian Keller lived. Central City was a bustling town of nearly 3,000 souls, with businesses and residences sprawling up the mountainside. Asking around might raise suspicions, and he wanted the return of the horse to be a private matter. Fortune favored him when he stopped at Donovan's saloon for a quick drink, and overheard 2 miners discussing the Keller girl and her struggle to keep her father's place since his passing. That little spread up Turkey Creek past the fork in the road, one miner said, shaking his head. Shame about John Keller. Good man. Left that girl all alone with nothing but troubles. Yates nursed his whiskey, committing the directions to memory. As dusk approached, he saddled his own gelding and led Starlight away from town, following Turkey Creek's winding path into the foothills. The Keller property came into view just as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, nestled in a clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, and a single lantern glowed in the window. Dismounting at the edge of the property, Yates led both horses quietly toward the barn. His plan was simple. Leave Starlight in the corral with a note explaining that she wasn't for sale after all, and disappear before anyone knew he was there. But as he approached the barn, the creak of a door opening startled him. A figure emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand. "Stop right there," Lillian's voice rang out, steady despite the circumstances. "State your business or leave my property." Yates froze, raising one hand while maintaining his grip on the horse's reins with the other. "Miss Keller, my name is Yates Dawson. I mean no harm. What are you doing here, and why do you have—" Her voice trailed off as recognition dawned. "Starlight." In the dim light of the rising moon, Yates could see the confusion on her face transform to disbelief. He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling foolish under her scrutiny. "I bought her from Hemming," he explained, "but it seems to me she belongs here with you." Lillian lowered the rifle slightly but didn't advance. "I don't understand. Why would you buy her just to bring her back?" Yates shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to explain his impulsive action without sounding like a fool or, worse, like someone expecting something in return. "Let's just say I've had to part with things I cared about before," he said finally. "It's never sat well with me." Lillian approached cautiously, rifle still in hand, until she was close enough to touch Starlight. The mare nickered softly, pushing her nose against Lillian's shoulder in greeting. Something inside Lillian seemed to break then, and she lowered her weapon completely, burying her face in the horse's mane. When she looked up again, her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I can't repay you. Not now, maybe not ever." "I'm not asking for repayment," Yates replied, handing her the reins. "Just take good care of her." Before Lillian could respond, Yates mounted his gelding and tipped his hat. "Good evening, Miss Keller." "Wait," she called as he turned to go. "At least come in for coffee. It's the least I can do." Yates hesitated, then nodded. One cup of coffee couldn't hurt, and the night had grown chilly. After putting Starlight in the corral with fresh hay and water, they entered the small cabin. The interior was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a curtained-off sleeping area. Photographs and handmade quilts adorned the walls, giving the space a homey feel despite its modest furnishings. Lillian busied herself at the stove, spooning coffee grounds into a pot of boiling water. "I don't often receive visitors," she said, her back to him. "Especially not ones bearing such unexpected gifts." Yates removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I imagine not this far out of town." "It's just been me since Pa died in February," she said, pouring the coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "Pneumonia took him after he fell through the ice trying to save one of our cows." She placed a mug before him and sat across the table. "The bank's been pressing for the mortgage payment. That's why I had to sell Starlight. $20 buys me a little time, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "And now you've brought her back, and I still have the $20, and I don't know what to make of any of it." "Keep the money," Yates said. "Use it for your mortgage. As for Starlight, consider her returned to her rightful owner." Lillian studied him over the rim of her mug. "Why? You don't know me." Yates considered his words carefully. "I was passing by when you sold her. The look on your face. Well, it reminded me of my sister when she had to sell her favorite mare during hard times back in Kansas. I couldn't do anything for her then. I guess I thought I could do something now." "Your sister," Lillian repeated. "Is she still in Kansas?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, she died 3 years ago, cholera." "I'm sorry." Lillian reached across the table impulsively, touching his hand. "Truly." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire and the occasional whinny from the corral the only sounds. "Mr. Dawson, Yates, please." "Yates, I can't accept such generosity without offering something in return." He started to protest, but she held up a hand. "I'm not talking about money, but I have eggs from the chickens, vegetables from the garden, and I make a decent loaf of bread. Let me at least provide you with food while you're in town." It was a matter of pride, he realized. She couldn't accept charity without maintaining some dignity. "I'd appreciate that," he said. "I'm staying at the boarding house in town, working at the Silver Plume for now. Mining's not my usual line, but it pays." "What is your usual line?" she asked, refilling their mugs. "Cattle, mostly." "I was a trail boss for the last 4 years, driving herds up from Texas to the railheads in Kansas." Lillian's eyes widened with interest. "That sounds like quite an adventure." Yates chuckled. "Some days more than others. Stampedes, river crossings, rustlers, never a dull moment. But the trail drives are changing now with the railroads pushing west. I've been thinking about settling somewhere, maybe starting a small ranch of my own." "Around here?" she asked, then blushed at her forwardness. "Possibly. The land's good if you don't mind the mountains and the winters." He took a long sip of coffee. "What about you? You plan to stay on your father's ranch?" Lillian's expression grew somber. "I'd like to. It's all I have left of him and my mother, but keeping it has been challenging." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. Yates learned that Lillian had lost her mother at 12 and had been her father's helper and companion ever since. She knew ranching and had a small but thriving garden, kept chickens and a milk cow, and occasionally took in sewing for extra income. When Yates finally rose to leave, the night had deepened and the temperature had dropped considerably. "It's late," Lillian said, glancing out the window at the moonlit yard. "The trail back to town can be treacherous in the dark." "I've ridden in worse conditions," he assured her. She bit her lip, clearly conflicted. "There's the lean-to beside the barn where Pa used to sleep during calving season. It's not much, but it would be safer than riding back tonight." Yates considered the offer. It was sensible the mountain trails were indeed dangerous at night, but he was concerned about her reputation should anyone discover he'd stayed on her property. "I appreciate the offer, but I wouldn't want to cause any talk that might harm you," he said. Lillian's chin lifted slightly. "We're miles from the nearest neighbor, and you'd be in the lean-to, not the house. Besides, after what you did today, I trust your character." Her trust humbled him. "Then I accept with thanks." The lean-to was rustic but comfortable enough, with a cot and several blankets. After settling his horse for the night, Yates stretched out, listening to the night sounds of the Colorado wilderness and thinking about the remarkable woman in the cabin nearby. He hadn't planned on staying in Central City just long enough to earn some money before moving on, perhaps to Montana or even back to Wyoming. But now, he wasn't so sure about leaving. Morning came with the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of bacon frying. Yates emerged from the lean-to to find Lillian at the outdoor cooking fire, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Hope you're hungry," she called, gesturing to the table she'd set up outside the cabin. "Figured you deserved a proper breakfast before heading back to town." Breakfast consisted of bacon, eggs, and biscuits still warm from the oven, with honey from Lillian's own beehives. They ate as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I should get back before I'm missed at the mine," Yates said reluctantly as he finished his coffee. "Thank you for your hospitality." "And thank you for Starlight," Lillian replied, watching as the mare grazed contentedly in the morning light. "I still can't quite believe it." "Will I see you in town?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. A small smile played at her lips. "I'll be bringing eggs to the mercantile on Tuesday, and you know where to find me otherwise." Yates nodded, tipping his hat before mounting his gelding. "Until Tuesday, then." As he rode back toward Central City, following Turkey Creek's meandering path, Yates found himself already looking forward to Tuesday with an eagerness that both puzzled and pleased him. True to her word, Lillian appeared at the mercantile on Tuesday afternoon with a basket of eggs and fresh vegetables. Yates, who'd arranged to take his midday meal break at the same time, happened to be passing by as she emerged from the store. "Miss Keller," he called, quickening his pace to catch up with her. She turned, her face lighting up with a smile that transformed her from pretty to beautiful. "Mr. Dawson Yates, how nice to see you. Finished your business at the mercantile?" he asked, gesturing to her now empty basket. "Yes, though Mr. Peterson only gave me half of what the eggs are worth," she said with a sigh. "But he knows I have few options for selling them elsewhere." Yates frowned. "That doesn't seem right. It's the way of things." She shrugged, then changed the subject. "How is your work at the mine?" "Dusty, dark, and not something I'd care to do for the rest of my days," he admitted. "But the pay is steady." They stood awkwardly for a moment, neither quite ready to part ways. "I was about to get some lunch at the cafe," Yates said finally. "Would you care to join me?" Lillian hesitated, glancing around at the busy street. "I'm not sure that would be proper." "It's just lunch," he assured her, "in full view of the entire town. Nothing improper about two people sharing a meal." After a moment's deliberation, she nodded. "All right then. Lunch would be nice." The Central City Cafe was crowded with miners and townspeople, but they managed to find a small table near the window. Several curious glances came their way. Lillian wasn't often seen dining out, and certainly not with a man, but Yates made a point of being respectful and proper in his demeanor. Over bowls of stew and cornbread, they continued the conversation they'd begun at her cabin. Yates told her about his childhood in Missouri, his years driving cattle, and his dreams of establishing his own ranch someday. Lillian shared stories of growing up in Central City, of learning to garden from her mother and ranch from her father, and of her own hopes to expand the small operation her father had built. "Pa always wanted to breed horses," she explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Not just any horses, but good, sturdy stock suited for the mountains. Starlight was supposed to be the beginning of that dream. She has excellent bloodlines and the perfect temperament." "You know a lot about horses," Yates observed, impressed by her knowledge. Pa made sure of it. "Said a woman should know as much as a man about things that matter, and in Colorado, horses matter." Their meal stretched to nearly 2 hours, both reluctant to end the pleasant interlude. Finally, Lillian glanced at the clock on the cafe wall and sighed. "I should head back. The chickens need feeding, and I have bread to bake before sunset." Yates stood, helping her with her shawl. "May I walk you to the edge of town?" They strolled side by side through Central City's bustling streets, their conversation flowing easily. At the town's outskirts, where the road began its climb into the foothills, Yates stopped. "I've enjoyed our lunch," he said. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." Lillian smiled up at him, the afternoon sun catching the golden highlights in her hair. "I'd like that." "I'm coming back on Friday to deliver quilts to Mrs. Thornton." "Friday it is, then," he agreed, watching as she began the long walk back to her ranch. He returned to the mine with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before, earning curious looks from his fellow miners. Something about Lillian Keller had gotten under his skin in the best possible way. Friday couldn't come soon enough. When Friday arrived, Yates waited outside Mrs. Thornton's dress shop, watching for Lillian. The morning had brought an early autumn chill, and leaves were beginning to turn on the aspens that dotted the mountainsides surrounding Central City. He spotted her coming down the street, her arms full of carefully folded quilts, her cheeks pink from the walk into town. Without hesitation, he moved to help her, taking the burden from her arms. "These are beautiful," he said, admiring the intricate patterns as they entered the shop. "Did you make them?" "My mother taught me," Lillian explained. "It's another way to earn a little extra during the winter months." Mrs. Thornton, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, raised an eyebrow at the sight of Yates carrying Lillian's quilts, but said nothing beyond pleasantries as she examined each piece. "Exquisite work as always, Lillian," she said, selecting 3 quilts. "I can offer you $8 for these." "10," Lillian countered firmly. The blue one alone took 2 months to complete. After some negotiation, they settled on $9, which Mrs. Thornton counted out from her cash box. Outside the shop, Lillian tucked the money carefully into her pocket. "One more payment toward keeping the ranch," she said with quiet determination. Their lunch was even more enjoyable than the first, with Lillian gradually relaxing in Yates's company. He found himself captivated by the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the serious set of her mouth when discussing ranch matters, and the graceful movement of her hands as she gestured to emphasize a point. "You mentioned wanting to breed horses," he said as they finished their meal. "What's stopping you?" Her smile faded. "Money, primarily, and without a proper stallion, Starlight's bloodlines don't help much." Yates considered this. "I might know someone, a rancher outside Denver with some fine stallions. He owes me a favor." Hope flickered in her eyes before caution tamped it down. "Even if I had access to a stallion, I'd need more land, more feed, more everything. The bank's not likely to loan me anything additional when I can barely meet the current mortgage. What if you had a partner?" The words were out before he could consider their implications. Lillian's eyes widened. "A partner?" Yates backtracked quickly, just thinking aloud. Partnerships are common in ranching ventures. She studied him for a long moment, then looked down at her plate. "I should be getting back," she said, changing the subject. "There's a storm brewing in the mountains." Indeed, dark clouds were gathering over the peaks to the west. Yates paid for their meal and walked with her to the livery, where she'd arranged to rent a horse for the journey home, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. But the threatening weather had convinced her of its necessity. "Let me ride with you," Yates suggested, as the first fat raindrops began to fall. "That storm looks nasty." Lillian hesitated, but a crack of thunder decided the matter. "All right, I'd welcome the company." They rode through increasingly heavy rain, the temperature dropping noticeably as they climbed higher into the foothills. By the time they reached the Keller ranch, they were both soaked through and shivering. "Come inside and warm up before you head back," Lillian insisted, leading the way to the cabin. Inside, she stoked the fire while Yates removed his dripping coat and hat. The small space quickly warmed, but their clothes remained sodden. "I have some of my father's things," Lillian offered, disappearing behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the main room. She returned with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers. "They might be a bit short, but they're dry." She turned her back discreetly while he changed, then handed him a towel for his hair. "I'll make some coffee to warm us up." The storm showed no signs of abating, with lightning illuminating the cabin in brief, brilliant flashes and thunder shaking the walls. Sitting by the fire with steaming mugs of coffee, they listened to the rain pounding on the roof. "You won't be able to return to town in this," Lillian said, concern etching her features. "The creek will be overflowing its banks by now." "I've weathered worse," Yates assured her, though in truth, the prospect of riding back through the storm held little appeal. "Don't be foolish," she admonished. "Flash floods are common in these ravines. You'd be risking your life for no good reason." She was right, of course. "If you're certain it's no imposition, I'd be grateful to wait out the storm here." As evening deepened, they shared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and the last of Lillian's cornbread. The intimate setting and shared predicament dissolved some of the formality between them, and their conversation turned to more personal matters. "Have you ever been married?" Lillian asked as she cleared away their plates. Yates shook his head. "The cattle trail doesn't lend itself to settling down. What about you? No suitors in Central City?" A shadow crossed her face. "There was someone once, Thomas Garrett. We were to be married 3 years ago." "What happened?" Yates asked gently, noting her pained expression. "He died in a mine collapse, the same accident that injured my father's back and led to our financial troubles." She blinked rapidly, pushing away old grief. "After that, there wasn't much time for courting, with Pa needing care and the ranch to run." "I'm sorry," Yates said, understanding now some of the shadows he'd glimpsed in her eyes. Their conversation drifted to happier topics: funny stories from Yates's days on the cattle trail, Lillian's adventures exploring the mountains with Starlight, shared childhood memories of fishing and swimming in creeks, much like the one that ran through her property. The storm continued unabated, and as midnight approached, they faced the reality of sleeping arrangements. "You take the bed," Yates insisted. "I'll be fine by the fire." Lillian protested, but eventually relented when he pointed out that he'd slept in far worse conditions during his trail days. She disappeared behind the curtain, and Yates made himself as comfortable as possible on a pallet of blankets near the hearth. Despite the storm's fury outside, Yates found the cabin oddly peaceful. The rhythmic sound of rain on the roof, the occasional crackle of the fire, and the knowledge that Lillian slept just a few feet away created a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in years. He awoke to the smell of coffee and biscuits. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's windows, indicating that the storm had passed. Lillian stood at the stove, humming softly as she cooked. "Morning," he said, sitting up and running a hand through his tousled hair. She turned, a smile lighting her face. "Good morning. Thought you might be hungry after our adventure yesterday." They ate breakfast together, both acutely aware of the domestic scene they presented him in her father's clothes, her with her hair loosely braided for sleep, sharing a meal in the early morning light. It was a glimpse of what could be, and Yates found himself wanting more of these quiet moments. "I should head back to town," he said reluctantly after they'd finished eating. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It was no imposition," Lillian assured him, gathering the breakfast dishes. "I'm grateful for the company." Outside, the world was washed clean by the storm, the air crisp and clear. Yates changed back into his own clothes, now dry after hanging near the fire overnight, and prepared to leave. At the door, he turned to Lillian, suddenly reluctant to go. "I meant what I said yesterday about possibly partnering on a horse breeding operation. Would you consider it?" Surprise flickered across her face, followed by cautious interest. "Are you serious?" "I am. I have some savings, not a fortune by any means, but enough to make a start, and I know horses and cattle." He hesitated, then added, "Think about it. We can discuss it further next time." She nodded slowly. "I will think about it." As Yates rode back to Central City, he reflected on the rapid shift in his plans. A week ago, he'd been thinking of moving on after making enough money at the mine. Now, he was considering putting down roots, investing in a partnership with a woman he barely knew. But something about Lillian Keller and her determined struggle to keep her father's legacy alive resonated deeply with him. The following week brought several more meetings between them. Yates began riding out to the ranch in the evenings after his shift at the mine, helping with repairs to the barn roof and corral fencing. They discussed the potential partnership in detail, drawing up plans for expanding the horse breeding operation gradually over several years. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Yates finally voiced the question that had been on his mind. "Lillian, I need to know something before we formalize this partnership." He turned to face her directly. "Is this strictly a business arrangement for you?" She met his gaze steadily, a blush rising in her cheeks. "What else would it be? I think you know." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I didn't just buy Starlight and bring her back out of kindness. From the moment I saw you in town that day, I felt drawn to you. And these past weeks, getting to know you, I find myself thinking about more than just breeding horses." Lillian's breath caught, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Yates, she paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've been alone for so long, taking care of Pa, then trying to save the ranch. I haven't allowed myself to think about those sorts of feelings. And now," he prompted gently. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Now I find myself looking forward to your visits more than is probably proper for a business partner." It was all the encouragement Yates needed. He leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek, and kissed her softly. After a moment of surprise, Lillian responded, her lips warm and yielding against his. When they drew apart, her eyes were shining in the fading light. "I should probably mention that the neighbors will talk if they see us like this," she whispered. Yates chuckled. "Let them talk. In fact." He took a deep breath. "Maybe we should give them something worth talking about. Marry me, Lillian." Her eyes widened. "Yates, we've known each other barely a month." "Sometimes a month is all it takes to know what you want," he said. "I'm not suggesting tomorrow, but soon. We could build something here together. The horse breeding, yes, but also a life." Lillian was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "You're not proposing just because of the ranch, are you? Or out of some misplaced sense of chivalry?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm proposing because in the short time I've known you, I've come to admire your strength, your determination, your kindness. Because the thought of riding away from here from you leaves me cold. Because I think we could be happy together." Her smile bloomed slowly, like a flower opening to the sun. "Then yes, not tomorrow, but soon." Their kiss this time was deeper, a promise of the future they would build together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Central City. Most responses were positive. Lillian was well respected despite her financial difficulties, and Yates had made a favorable impression during his time in town. But there were exceptions. Silas Hemming, who had hoped to acquire the Keller property when the bank foreclosed, was particularly displeased. And Mr. Peterson at the Mercantile, who had been paying Lillian less than market value for her eggs and produce, suddenly found himself faced with a more assertive negotiator in Yates. November brought the first heavy snow, transforming the landscape into a glistening white wonderland. Yates quit his job at the mine and moved permanently to the ranch, taking up residence in the lean-to that he'd improved and expanded into a proper cabin. Though they were engaged, both agreed it was best to maintain separate quarters until their wedding, planned for the spring. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were spent tending to the animals and property. Afternoons often found them riding the boundaries of the ranch, Yates on his gelding and Lillian on Starlight, discussing plans for expansion and improvement. Evenings were for quiet conversations by the fire, sharing dreams and building a vision for their future together. In early December, Yates traveled to Denver to meet with his rancher friend about acquiring a stallion suitable for their breeding program. He returned triumphant, leading a magnificent black Morgan horse with a white star on his forehead. "He's perfect," Lillian breathed, walking around the stallion with an experienced eye. "Strong legs, good chest, intelligent eyes, and he'll complement Starlight's coloring beautifully." "His name is Midnight," Yates said, pleased by her reaction. "He's yours an early Christmas gift." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "Yates, how can we afford this? My friend owed me a considerable favor, and I sold my claim in Wyoming territory." He shrugged off her protests. "I won't need it now. My future is here with you." Christmas at the ranch was simple but joyous. They exchanged modest gifts: a new hat from Lillian to replace Yates's weathered Stetson, a silver locket from Yates containing a small braid of Starlight's mane. They shared a festive dinner with their nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, who had warmed to Yates after seeing the improvements he'd made to the Keller property. As winter deepened, they faced challenges together: a blizzard that required them to dig pathways to the barn to feed the animals, a bout of illness that left Lillian weak for several days, a broken water pump that Yates repaired in freezing temperatures. Each obstacle overcome strengthened their bond and confirmed their decision to join their lives. In February, they marked the anniversary of John Keller's death with a quiet visit to his grave in the small cemetery outside Central City. Lillian placed a wreath of evergreen boughs on the simple marker. "He would have liked you," she told Yates, her gloved hand tucked into his arm. "He always said I needed someone who understood the land and wasn't afraid of hard work." "I wish I could have met him," Yates replied, "to thank him for raising such an extraordinary daughter." The mortgage payment came due that same month, and for the first time since her father's death, Lillian was able to pay it in full and on time. The bank manager's surprise was evident as he counted the money twice before issuing a receipt. "Miss Keller, it seems your circumstances have improved," he remarked, glancing at Yates, who stood beside her. "Mr. Dawson and I are partners in expanding the ranch," Lillian explained with quiet dignity. "You can expect all future payments to be similarly prompt." As they left the bank, Yates squeezed her hand. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" A mischievous smile played at her lips. "Perhaps a little." March brought the first signs of spring crocuses pushing through the melting snow, longer days filled with sunshine, the birth of Starlight's foal, a dainty filly with her mother's golden coat and Midnight's strong build. "She's beautiful," Lillian whispered, watching the wobbly-legged newborn nurse for the first time. "What shall we name her?" Yates wrapped an arm around her waist. "How about Hope? Seems fitting for our first foal and our new beginning." "Hope," Lillian repeated, leaning into his embrace. "Perfect." Their wedding took place in April, just as the mountainsides burst into the vibrant green of new growth. The ceremony was held on the ranch, with Judge Hamilton officiating. Lillian wore a simple white dress that she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Yates had purchased a new suit in Denver, looking uncommonly formal but undeniably handsome. The entire community turned out for the celebration that followed: miners from the Silver Plume, shopkeepers from Central City, neighboring ranchers, and even a few of Yates's former colleagues from his cattle-driving days who traveled from as far as Kansas to witness his settling down. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, and someone produced a fiddle. Dancing commenced on the packed earth beside the barn, with the newlyweds leading the first dance. "Happy Mrs. Dawson," Yates murmured as he guided her through the steps. Lillian's eyes sparkled in the lantern light. "Impossibly so, Mr. Dawson." Later, after the guests had departed and they were alone in the cabin now theirs together, Yates pulled Lillian into his arms. "I never told you," he said, his voice low and intimate. "But that first day when I saw you with Starlight at Hemming's livery, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even with tears in your eyes, or maybe because of them. Your love for that horse shone through so clearly. I knew then that you were someone special." Lillian reached up to trace the line of his jaw. "And I thought you were crazy, buying a horse just to return it to a stranger." "Not crazy," he corrected, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Just instantly smitten." Their first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. The horse breeding business began slowly but steadily, with Hope developing into a promising filly and Starlight expecting another foal. They acquired 2 more mares, gradually building the foundation of what they hoped would become a respected breeding operation. The original ranch house was expanded, with Yates adding 2 more rooms and improving the existing structure. Lillian's garden doubled in size, providing not only for their own table but producing enough excess to sell in town. In October, a year after Yates's proposal, they received news that the railroad would be extending a line closer to Central City, opening up new markets for their horses. The timing couldn't have been better, as Lillian had just discovered she was expecting their first child. "A baby and a railroad," Yates mused as they sat on the porch swing he'd built that summer. "Our fortunes are looking up, Mrs. Dawson." Lillian rested her head on his shoulder, her hand cradling the slight swell of her abdomen. "They've been looking up since the day you brought Starlight back to me." In the corral beyond the barn, Starlight grazed peacefully alongside her growing daughter and the other horses that now comprised the Dawson Ranch breeding stock. The mare raised her head at the sound of Lillian's voice, nickering softly in recognition. "She remembers that night," Yates said, following Lillian's gaze. "Smart animal." "Smarter than me, perhaps," Lillian replied with a gentle laugh. "It took me weeks to realize what she knew immediately, that you were a good man with a kind heart. Just a man who recognized something precious when he saw it," Yates said, drawing her closer. "And was fortunate enough that you saw something worth keeping in me as well." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, they remained on the porch, planning their future and marveling at how a single act of kindness had changed the course of both their lives. Spring arrived once more, bringing with it new life to the Dawson Ranch. Starlight's second foal, a sturdy colt with his father's dark coloring, but his mother's gentle disposition, was born in early March. 2 weeks later, Lillian gave birth to their son, whom they named John Yates Dawson in honor of both his grandfather and father. The baby thrived, growing strong on his mother's milk and the clean mountain air. Lillian recovered quickly from the birth, though Yates insisted on hiring a local girl, Emily Henderson, to help with household tasks while Lillian adjusted to motherhood. "You don't have to do everything yourself anymore," he reminded her when she protested the expense. "We're partners in this, remember." By summer, the railroad line was completed, bringing increased business to Central City and new opportunities for the Dawson Ranch. Their reputation for breeding sturdy, intelligent mountain horses was spreading, with buyers coming from as far as Denver to inspect their stock. Hope, now 2 years old, had developed into a beautiful mare that confirmed the wisdom of their breeding program. They had kept her as part of their foundation stock, but her first foal would be eagerly anticipated the following year. On a warm July evening, as they sat on their porch with baby John sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them, Yates reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "You ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't been passing by Hemming's that day?" he asked, his arm around Lillian's shoulders. If I hadn't seen you selling Starlight, she considered the question, her gaze drifting to where Starlight grazed contentedly in the evening light. Sometimes, I might have lost the ranch, or struggled along somehow, always one step away from disaster. And I would have moved on, never knowing what I was missing, Yates said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Thankfully, fate had other plans. Fate or Starlight, Lillian said with a smile. She's the one who brought us together after all. As if hearing her name, the Palomino mare raised her head, regarding them with intelligent eyes before returning to her grazing. In the soft glow of twilight, the Dawson Ranch, once the struggling Keller property, was a picture of prosperity and peace. Lillian leaned into her husband's embrace, contentment washing over her. From nearly losing everything to gaining more than she'd ever dreamed possible, all because a kind-hearted cowboy couldn't bear to see her part with her beloved horse. "I love you, Yates Dawson," she whispered, turning to meet his gaze. Every day more than the last, his eyes, warm and steady as always, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "And I love you, Lillian Dawson, until the mountains crumble and the stars fall from the sky." As darkness settled over the Colorado landscape, they remained on the porch, planning for the future, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond as strong and enduring as the Rocky Mountains themselves.